movie. Um, Hayes just put it out there. We should make this into a movie. And I was like, okay, when we finish hiking. So we actually developed the feature. We got an offer on the feature to sell it, and we asked if we could direct it. We asked if we could co-direct it, which was really what we wanted to do, is make this movie ourselves. And they said no. So we declined the offer, and people started advising us and saying the best way to go about getting a chance to co-direct would be to direct something, and the best way to do that is to do a proof of concept short. So we wrote Free Martin as a result. Free Martin is the prequel to the feature. And so then we shot the short last summer. So that's kind of how it all kind of played out.
I want to talk a little bit about the poster of Free Martin with a beautiful cow. Can you talk a little bit about that character or, the idea that you had for it together?
Yeah, I was like, we can kind of go back and forth about this. I think I remember, again, because it's a proof of concept short, that Scott had basically been like, I want to tell you about this thing called a free mart. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so we had started to talk about free martin. Essentially, it's a cow that it's a cow that's born female but doesn't have any of the kind of expected anatomy and like anatomical functions that a female cow has. So that kind of brings into conversation gender and sexuality and how in the eyes of the father that this cow is useless because it doesn't do like what a female is supposed to do, right? So that kind of quickly became a metaphor for the larger conversation. They're on a dairy farm, and so it really just fit nicely. And that was on Scott for some Googling to find
Yeah.
that a free martin existed.
Yeah, really. I think it comes from we knew the center of our story. We knew the story that we wanted to tell. And then you just start playing around. I mean, neither one of us worked on a farm. So we started like looking, we always had the feature set on a dairy farm. So we started looking deeper into what dairy farm life is like. And, I just happened upon this cow, this free martin cow, and they're real. It's not as though they're that uncommon. Become like mascots on farms because they don't produce anything, so they have no, like, from the farmer's point of view, no function, right? But they become mascots and almost like pets. So it was perfect for this story. And I mean, we had a whole version of her taking the cow, stealing the cow, and running off with the cow. But then we're like, we could never shoot that. So that was all cut down. It was just more the idea of the cow, that she left.
There is a mention of Paris in the script. I hope I'm not revealing anything saying this because obviously in France we do have a little bit of that decentralization going on,
Yeah.
and just the idea that the city either doesn't care about farmers or is just so far, or
Yeah.
just that all the opportunities really are just they're just out of hand. Is it
Mm.
something that you meant in the character story?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a big part of the feature. So it's really about Paris being a more open-minded city than maybe some of the environments that we're sort of playing off of. So yeah, it was absolutely meant to be this sort of place that represents a dream of what Paige would hope for, so far away from the world that she knows.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. And definitely, I'm like, not to give away too much in the feature, but that kind of that play on urban versus rural, exactly what you're talking about with kind of that potential looking down on folks that are more rural, kind of seeing it as a different life. That there is still that sense of like a dream, or in the US, we'd say like the American dream of this bigger, better. But at the end of the day, who's to say if even if you go there, you travel there, you become less rural, do you actually get to live that dream? Do you actually get to, is moving going to change your life in the ways that you expect?
Yeah.
How did you go about making the short? This is a screenplay that is selected at the Paris International Film Festival and actually has already been filmed. How did it feel to actually see the story come to life, and what do you expect from the outcome of it?
I'll answer the second part first. I'm just hoping for the best, but you're always a little afraid that we've done so much work on this project, but you never know how it's ultimately going to end up. But the the process of shooting the film was incredible. It was a roller coaster ride. We had a crew of 26 people, four actors. I mean, it was a huge production for us to start, but it kind of grew, where we had Tim Palmer is the DP on it, and when he came aboard, there were a lot of people that underneath him within the crew that wanted to be part of it. The when the script started winning at festivals, there were people that wanted to be part of it. Then, Morris Smith was the casting director, and people wanted to be part of it, and we got amazing talent because of that. So it's just like every time a person came aboard, more people wanted to be part of the project. And so it grew. There was a point in the summer where we sat down and we looked at each other and we're like, this is much bigger than we thought it was going to be. It just became this huge project. We took over a train station for a day. And we took over a farm for a day. It was a really, it was fun, and after it was all over, we're like, maybe we'll never do this again. And then 2 days later, we're like, I got an idea for another short.
Eh,
So, yeah,
That's the goal.
yeah, it was a
yeah.
lot.
No, definitely. Yeah, and we shot it only in 4 days, which was I think in hindsight, a big goal to try to shoot a film of this level, just with the amount of locations and travel and animals and young actors. Our actors were the age of the characters, so one was 14 and one was 15. And having young actors, they blew our minds. They were absolutely spectacular. We didn't all the things that we were anticipating and worried about. They made it so much easier. And it was, I think it was really cool to get the opportunity to co-direct, because by the end of the last day, we were able to say, okay, you go over there, you work on that scene, you work on staging that individual. We have a lot of scenes with different perspectives. So being able to set up in two locations and have a director essentially in a different part of the location, blocking and planning, that made it just like so much easier to get into that flow where essentially you get to have a second body double that has the same vision in mind. And so that ended up being a really cool process,
Yeah.
getting to co-direct, because it meant that we could just be more places and do more, and the vision still held across the entire experience.
It felt like we really knew what we were doing at the very end.
Yeah.
Like it really, we all the work. I mean, there was just so much to juggle. But yeah, at the very end, we were a fine-tuned machine where we just knew what the other person was doing was going to
Mm,
be tied to what we were doing. Yeah, it was really neat. The final scene was the most complicated, I think, in terms of
yeah.
performances for all characters. So the final scene we shot, not the final scene of the movie. And so it was really neat to have two of us. We had a two camera setup for the entire thing because Maura Smith had recommended they work with a lot of young actors. If you have two cameras, you can get performances, and when you ask a younger actor to repeat something, sometimes they can't do that. So, they just don't, what exactly did I do? Or they try to do it and they do something else. If you have two cameras with two different lenses, you get, double the coverage all the time. So that was a big help. That was also a big help in getting it done in 4 days.
Yeah.
And you can
100%.
also more easily with animals. Obviously, animals are
Mhm.
very present on the screen, and I was just wondering if you were okay talking about them as crew. Did you have
Yeah.
to hire an expert? How did you go about actually filming with those beautiful animals?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about? I was like, you
Oh,
did
I
a
think
lot of the producing
it was
on the animals.
complicated. So, I mean, we paired way off. We had um, uh, the animal. We're getting a seal. Ultimately at the end of the movie that no animals were harmed in the making of this film, and so we had someone come on site, which they pay for. They had somebody come out, fly to Maine. Drive out there and sit and observe everything, and we also had one of the farmers as our handler. So there were times when if the cow was breathing heavily, the farmer was like, "This is too much for the cow. There's too many people around, lights, so we have to back off." And we just had to move. But there were certainly some difficult times too. Animals, they are very much set in routine. And routine is not a bunch of people with lights and cameras in their space. So some of the animals started to react and we had to back off. It was a lot of, there was a lot of balancing in terms of making sure that the animals weren't harmed and that no people, would get harmed in that process.
Yeah. And the fact that we shot on a farm, it was not a set, meant that in terms of thinking about actually shooting it and working with our DP is shooting it really similar to the process of documentary because we knew that exactly what Scott's talking about is that timing. So if an animal is going to come through to go to pasture, that's the time they're going through. We can't say run it again. We can't say, head back, put the cow back, have them walk again. So being able to work with our awesome camera crew to think about it as kind of a documentary film in that moment of filming, just to plan to because you can't plan, and you can't always react to animals. So a lot of shots we kind of were shot handheld and were the only shot we have of that instance. So kind of had to step into a little bit of documentary filmmaking to get that done.
And that Hayes has a background in documentary filmmaking. I don't. So there was a lot of B-roll that was captured as well, even
Mm-hmm.
after the shoot of going around the farm. I have to say, the farmers allowed us to do so much and nearly
Mm-hmm.
take over their farm for a day. And I should say, in addition to all this happening on their farm, they were moving a house on
Yeah.
their farm on wheels. So we actually couldn't have that in the background because it was leaving. One of the houses
Continuity.
on the farm was on wheels and being pulled off the site to a down a house down a location down the street. So it was chaotic, to have this house moving in the background while we're also shooting. But they were absolutely wonderful. We went there with the crew, for setups and they were so welcoming and really. They were honest about when things were not okay, but they were so welcoming and so wonderful. I can't say enough about it. We go there often and we get our syrup and our honey, and um, they, it's just they're just such a wonderful group of people. It was really neat to work with them.
Some angles might be inspired from documentary and your background as a documentarist, but it's a love story, is it? Can you talk a little bit about the love aspect behind Free Martin?
That's a great question. I mean, I would say that Julia and Abby were the two young people that were our two actors that played the two girls. And I think a huge part of the success and making that love story that was clear in script form, right? A lot of those moments were not verbal, a lot of them were visual and them kind of connecting one another, finding that fear of being queer and in love. A lot of that is visual, and having a 14 and 15-year-old be able to to show those visual cues was so impressive. And so I think that the only way we were able to kind of go script to screen with that love is having two actors that just their chemistry was fantastic. They became friends by the end, which made it so easy. And we had an amazing team kind of consistently working with them. Again, working with young actors, it can be really tough to step into a really mature role of playing two individuals in love. And our intimacy coordinator did a fantastic job working with them when they had scenes that were more intimate and checking in with them. But really, it was our two actresses were just phenomenal in creating that chemistry and staying true to the fact that it's not always verbal. It's really something that you have to capture with little moments, little interactions, a glance, and obviously that's easier said than done in a script form. But being able to take that with our two really young actresses, we were really lucky that I think I mean
Yeah,
obviously
right.
it's not we don't have it in full right now, but I think it showed pretty well bringing that script to screen.
Yeah. And the intimacy coordinator met with them prior to the shoot, like during rehearsals, and asked them, is there anything in this script that you're uncomfortable with? We were willing to cut stuff, to change stuff. There were things that came up in rehearsal that we wanted to make sure they were okay with. And they were able to tell, you know, the intimacy coordinator whatever it is that they didn't want, and that would be relayed back to us. And then we had somebody on site. Really, when they shot the more intimate scenes, we allowed them to decide who they wanted in that space. So
Mm-hmm.
it was very intimate in and of itself. And, there were people that weren't allowed even in Video Village watching it. So it was, and we told them that we're going to respect whatever it is that was going to make you feel comfortable. We don't want to cross any lines here.
Mhm.
And I think that allowed them to have a comfort level during the shoot
Mhm.
that made it actually work, where they weren't at all uptight about what was happening. Their parents were on site as well. They were
Mhm.
Oh,
regularly
wow.
consulted on everything. Yeah,
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
they're only 14, 15 years old. So, and their
Yeah.
parents loved being part of it.
Mhm.
So yeah, we had to be sensitive with animals, with these actors, with everything that we're doing. I believe we did the best we could, given all the
Mhm. Yeah.
circumstances, to try to figure
Oh,
out
yeah.
what's the right thing to do in this moment. But yeah,
And
they were incredible in terms of their
they
performance.
were. And that was the last scene that Scott was referencing
Yeah.
that was really hard to shoot. That was our last scene. Was the scene where they're the most intimate. And so that was really hard. There was no other time to put it in the the shot list. There was like no other place to put it. So having that that scene last was really stressful. But again, yeah, intimacy coordinator, and I think we had a lot of fun. So by the end, again, we had gotten so close in 4 days because you can't, when you're living 2 feet away from set with everyone and you're there for hours and hours a day, you get really comfortable. But getting to have an intimate scene where we're joking on walkie talkies, we're getting the girls are comfortable because we are making jokes with them and having fun with them, and it's light. But at the same time, treating them like professionals, and that this is a professional set, and that they are professionals, that this is something that they can do professionally. And I think that's a huge benefit to our crew, that we could have that fun and that enjoyment with the girls, but at the same time keep it professional. And I think everyone kind of felt very mentally safe making that the last scene. Um, and it was probably, I think it's one of, I would say, more one of our more proud scenes in terms of directing, just because so much effort went into every second of that scene. And it happened to be the last one.
Yeah, and I think that I will say that most of the success of that scene is attributed to Hayes's direction with them. I was working mostly down below with the reaction shots of the father character, while Hayes was up in the loft, with those two. So we were trying to do both at once, and
Yeah.
and it was a struggle even for for the father character to figure out exactly how to hit this so that what's going on internally for his character when this happens. This is the moment when he says breakfast. And we tried so many different ways to deliver that line. I don't know if we entirely planned this, but I think it worked out so perfectly that the most intimate scene was the last scene we shot
Yeah.
because, as Hayes said, we really did become closer as a group, and they became closer as friends, the two actors. That if we have shot that first
Yeah.
and really it
We
was a
wouldn't have
matter
done
of when the farm was available. They gave us the day that we
that.
could shoot there, and that happened to be the last day of the shoot. So there's a lot of luck involved there that we got to shoot that as the very last moment where there was a certain relief when we knew we were shooting the last scene, because all the way through
Yeah.
this, you're like, are we ever going to get it? We were running behind almost immediately, on the first day. And so finally we were caught up. We knew how long this was going to take. And I think there was everyone was sort of at ease at that point where you're just running, nonstop throughout the whole shoot. So this was probably the calmer moment in the shoot itself.
And filming with two cameras, that sounds like a very brave choice.
The
That's
two,
our camera crew. Yeah.
yeah, the camera
Yeah.
crew was amazing. Yeah, they were very much in sync.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh. Yeah.
yeah, they were very good and at sort of figuring out what are the angles, staying out of each other's ways. The beauty is when we had very expensive lenses
Mhm.
with us. If you have two cameras, they're not really going to use the same lens. So you had the opportunity to get, very
Yeah.
different perspectives, and very different shots on the
Yeah.
same material.
Yeah. And it made it easy for us to get to step back because our DP and our camera crew were so strong, that we could convey the vision, but trust that it would result the way we'd hoped. Like, I think especially the opportunity to have written the script that is playing out, to be in Video Village and like get giddy because you're like, that's exactly what it's supposed to look like. That's like when you're writing it, you're like, that's what it was in my head. And so That was pretty amazing. And then yeah, to be writers and see something appear exactly how it was in your mind, was a pretty awesome experience. And that was just because we leaned into to I think that was across the board, all of our crew members leaning into their talents and trusting that they have the skill set, and that saved us time because we weren't nitpicking. But it also really let them show us different ways than we had imagined it, and show us new ways to think about it because they brought their skill set, and there was no um, sense of like insult if they were like, oh, well, we see it maybe like this, or you thought about it like this in the script, but what if we did this? Having that kind of candid conversation continuously made it really easy to make the best result and kind of stay humble in, because it's hard to not be tied to a script that you wrote, right? But on set, you're going to have to make adjustments, and there are people that are smarter than you on that set that know better than you. Leaning in and listening, I think, made that possible.
Yeah. And the same thing goes for producing the whole
Yeah.
project. It's just constantly meeting with people and saying, just tell me anything that you can about the process, and listening to them and really taking their advice. So again, the two camera setup was not our idea. I never even would have thought of that, but somebody with some experience of working with children, Maura was able to give us that advice, and a lot of other advice in terms of when we're casting, how to get the performances out of these. Both actors, their backgrounds are mostly on the stage, and so you've got to take their performances and bring it in for film. And we got some wonderful advice from Moore Smith about how to, best direct them and get the best performances out of them, knowing that this is new to them too. I mean, so we're new co-directors, and we've got
100%.
two actors who are new at this as well.
Any insights on Free Martin feature length?
So it's
Yeah.
the feature length script or film is called Two Egg, and Two Egg is the town. So we had gone through great lengths to get a bus. There's a shot in the short where the bus that they don't go to school on, that they're skipping school, it goes by, and there's this beautiful view of the mountains, and then we see them walk by. Um, and so on that bus is the town, the fictitious town called Two Egg, and Two Egg is the title of the feature. So yeah, it takes place in this small town in Maine, and basically the feature is that 4 years later, they're now finishing up high school, and Paige wants to get out of town. Like, she's had it. She stayed because she realized maybe I shouldn't leave and I need to be who I am. But now she's like, okay, I'm done. I need to go, and she wants to go to Paris. That's kind of the focus.
And real
Thank you
Paris this
so
time, not
much.
Paris,
The
Maine.
real Paris, yeah.
Yeah.
The real Paris versus the dreamy vision that they have for their future, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, they still have that in the feature, but when Hayes is saying the real Paris is because there's Paris, Maine, which is right the next town over from where we shot this movie. There's a real Paris, Maine. So they end up settling for Paris, Maine because they can't afford to go to real Paris. But yeah, in the feature, they still dream about what Paris could be like.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. This was beyond inspiring.
Oh, great.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
It was wonderful.